Never be afraid to make a play if you think it shows long-run positive expectation. When I was learning poker, I saw a lot of crazy plays at high stakes. Firing 3 bets into a tough opponent with nothing, check raising with bottom pair, just some real wild stuff. But these weren't amateurs making plays, they were pros, and there was a method to their madness. Well, I was able to learn why sometimes it is correct to bet multiple times, to being all in with nothing. I still didn't have the balls to go ahead and make those plays. There's a reason you need to have a large bankroll to play poker. Sometimes the proper play is extremely risky, and sometimes things backfire. You need the cushion to absorb the hit. So, without further ramblings, I introduce barrel theory. In poker, we will have squadouche more often than we have a real hand. Bluffing is a necessary tool in a winning player's arsenal. However, I want to stress, small bluffs are usually enough to get the job done. In fact, betting 3/4 of the pot on the flop, turn, and river is stronger and more likely to succeed than just over-betting all in on the flop, where, it seems kind of fishy, and also you only have one chance to get your opponent to fold rather than 3. Typically, I don't advocate going for big bluffs, but as you move up limits, there's no denying that this skill must be learned. So, how do we decide when it's right to go for the big bluff? Well, I think rather than asking when it's right to go for the big bluff, the correct question to ask is who should we try to run the big bluff on? As you already know from the playing the player section, opponents come in many different types, and each player in a category is still unique in their own way. Some nits play different than other nits in certain spots, some donks play different than other donks, etc. But, as a general rule, when it comes to barreling, by which I mean firing bluffs, I found that most players in their respective categories are similar in how many barrels they will fire with nothing and how many barrels they will call to keep you honest with a weak hand. By which I mean calling without much of a hand just because they expect you have nothing and they're not going to let you just bet and make them fold every time you guys see a flop together. So, for the numbers I will give, if an opponent calls one more barrel than what I have posted as willing to call, then your opponent probably has a big hand. He is not going to fold to another bet, and you should just quit the bluff once they've called more than the threshold. I hate giving up pots as much as the next player, but you gotta accept that once the threshold has been met, firing any more barrels is just burning money. So, we're gonna go look at how many bullets each opponent type is capable of firing. Nits. Uno. Typically, nits have a one-and-done policy. They will fire one continuation bet on the flop, and if called, they will shut down unless they have the goods. So, if they bet more than once, they've probably got the hand. Tags are capable of firing 2 barrels. These guys exercise pot control, so often they will bet 2 streets for value just as they would bet 2 streets as a bluff. But 90% of the time that a tight aggressive player puts in that 3rd barrel, they've got the nuts, especially if it's like a big overbet. It's like never a bluff from a tight aggressive player. Loose aggressives, they're crazy. They're capable of anything. If you're thinking about calling their bets, be prepared to call 3 of them because they fire, and fire away, whether they've got it or not. They just don't stop. And they don't just do it as a spew. They're quite calculated in when they barrel, but they can fire all 3 streets with nothing. A fish and a weak tight we're going to do together. No barrels. That's because these guys are so passive that they'll only bet when they have something. The only time these guys bluff, like ever, is if there's like a draw on the board and you've bet the flop and they called, most likely with the draw, and you bet the turn and again they called, most likely with the draw. If you check to them on the river when the draw missed, This is the one time that a fish or a weak type player will try to bluff, because they know that if they check, there's no way they're going to win the pot. And, they just assume that your check means weakness, even though you're just checking because you want them to bluff and get some value from their nothing hand that you know they wouldn't call a bet with. And finally, we've got donks. Not really too much to say. Donks are more wild than lags. I have infinite barrels posted because you just never know what these guys are going to do. Donks are often easy money, but because of the fact that they're willing to fire so many barrels, the variance of playing against a donk is extremely high. My one piece of advice when dealing with donks, because they love to just bet and get it in with crap and sometimes get lucky, if you get bad beat by one of these guys, don't tilt, because you should just be aware that that money is going to come back. It's just a matter of time. I almost never see a donk quit a game with more than $0, because they always just end up losing it eventually. So don't start playing bad just because they suck out on you. Just know the money's coming back. So now we're going to look at how many bullets our villain is capable of calling to keep us honest for each player type. So for nits, I got 0, because nits don't really call with nothing ever. If they call your bet, like your continuation bet, they have at least a mediocre hand, and you should probably abandon ship after the first bluff attempt fails unless you improve to something strong on the turn. Tight aggressives, I got 1 barrel. Tight aggressives like to keep you honest. Much similar to the nits one and done policy for betting, tags have a call one time policy. You always hear Antonio Espanier saying, all right, call one time. The idea is they just want to call your flop bet because they know that a lot of people like to bluff the flop, and they just want to see what you'll do on the turn. So if you fire the turn, they're probably going to believe you have the hand, because they're only going to call you once with nothing. But if you check, they'll probably try to steal it. So because of this, you're going to have to mix in firing that second barrel sometimes to keep them honest with you. As well, sometimes you might want to check a good hand on the turn, because you can expect that the tag is going to try to steal the pot from you when you show weakness after you fired your 1 barrel. Loose aggressives, we've got 3 barrels. This is because if a lag picks up a read, they're not going anywhere. I generally try not to bluff them, because once I fire the first shell, the second and third barrel are required a high percentage of the time. You can't expect these guys to just give up to a simple bluff, so if you're going to try to fight for that pot, be prepared to fire away. This is why I try not to get involved too much with loose aggressives, because they play well and they're willing to make some big calls. So try to avoid them, but know that if you do get into a battle with them, it's probably going to take all 3 shells to get them off their hand. And sometimes that won't even work either. So for fish, I've got that they'll call down 3 or 4 barrels with like any pair, because they're just bad players who just like to call. It's their favorite thing in life. So bluffing them is dumb. Just only bet against a fish for value. There's like no reason to try to bluff them. Just don't do it. Weak tight, similar to the nits and the tags, they might call you light like one time, but it's probably because they think they have the best hand. These guys love to fold, and usually the first bet will get it done, and if not, the second barrel will definitely work unless they've picked up something really, really strong. And finally, donks. I've got a wide range of how many bullets they're capable of calling. It's because it depends on the donk. Donks come in all different shapes and sizes and forms and whatever. You just got to remember they're unpredictable. I can't really make a generalization on this one. You just got to kind of observe what kind of donk you're playing, and get some experience with him and see if he does ever fold or if he's always calling down all the way to the end, and adjust your play accordingly. So just after looking at this stuff, you might think that if we got a player who's only capable of calling one shell, like a tight aggressive, that it would make sense that we should always double barrel against them. But that's not true, because a lot of the time they call the first barrel, they're still going to have a hand. In the case where we know they're only capable of firing the one shell, which is a more interesting example, we think that all we have to do is always call that continuation bet, and we can always steal the pot on the turn if they check, like I said the tight aggressives try to do. In theory, it makes sense, but if your opponent is a good player, you have to give them credit. Most players will notice repetitive behavior and adjust to it. If they see you always trying the same play, they're going to employ a countermeasure, so it's not going to work. As a beginner, the point of this lesson is just to simply make you aware of this stuff and how it applies to play. When you get more experience and move up stakes, you'll learn to understand it, how it works, and apply it properly. For now, only playing the nuts is the safest way to make money. There's no need to try risky plays to win faster. Don't try to force the action, just let the game come to you. Just remember, with some of the player types, if you're planning to call a bet, be sure that you are aware of the potential future bets to come, especially out of position. Like calling a loose aggressive once to keep them honest and folding to a later bet that we expected because we know that they're capable of firing 3 barrels is a waste of money. If you aren't prepared to call down as many barrels as they're prepared to fire at you, just simply save your money, fold to the first bet before the pot gets big. Low risk, low variance. We don't need to fight over every pot. We just win our fair share, and that's no problem when we're playing ultra tight and usually have the best hand. Anyway, I hope you guys found this lesson interesting. This barrel theory was a concept I kind of formulated on my own. I've never seen it anywhere else, so I hope you guys get as much value using the theories as I did developing them. Thanks.